This is my Dear Miss Scoffield video. So before I start, I wanted to preface that for this unit, I've met every single deadline, and even for the prior units, I've done every single deadline. I have done all the assignments. I've gone above and beyond by completing all the optional and extra assignments we've had throughout the year, like any getting to advanced assignments or extra essays. And I have also attended Success multiple times, even outside of Writer's Workshop, and I've tried to learn as much about writing rhetorical and argumentative essays, as well as getting those points for those subcategories like writing sophistication, evidence and commentary, and introduction/thesis as well. I've done I've looked at many assignments on satire and its effect on audience, which I've also incorporated into both my essays. And so the main thing that I thought of as I was fixing my essays was this quote here. I was told by Ms. Scoffield to condense all my essays because they were too long, or they were wordy, or they did not have a clear train of thought. And so my first and foremost goal was to condense all my essays into its simplest form. And so first I have the introduction. And so for my rhetorical essay, I was missing points on writing sophistication and evidence and commentary. And so to improve writing sophistication throughout my essay, I incorporated rhetorical devices like syntax, which was in the form of semicolons, dashes, or any sentence structure, or even italicization, as you see in the next paragraph. But for this first paragraph, all that I did was simplify any thoughts that I had. I removed any unimportant sentences, anything that was repeating what I said before, and I made sure to have a clear thesis, as I thought my thesis could definitely be improved, and so that's something I worked on. Then I had a very long first body paragraph, and it was very wordy and didn't have a clear transition from the first rhetorical device to the second rhetorical device. So what I ended up doing was splitting up this paragraph into two separate paragraphs to show my writing sophistication, that I can write essays in formats that are different from the typical 5-paragraph format, and because they both relate to the thesis but in their own separate ways. So it was a way better way to develop these two distinct ideas that eventually connected to each other. And so while they are separated, they still tie into each other, and they help improve my essay as a whole. And so as you can see, I also used repetition here to emphasize the kind of treatment that slaves had, and to really get the point that Banneker was trying to explain across. I also, for my third paragraph, or my third body paragraph, I aim to condense my information and rewrite my argument and rewrite the rhetorical device so that it makes more sense, and so it's easier for the reader to figure out where I'm going with my explanation. And so I incorporated a rhetorical question in order to really understand what question I was answering with my paragraph. And so it was about the hypocrisy of the nation. And so I asked, how could a nation so blatantly ignore its own values? And that's how I explained how the quote related to the contradiction of the country between Jefferson's and the Founding Fathers' words and the government's actions, and how it pertains to discrimination against African Americans. And so my last body paragraph was a 2 rhetorical device paragraph, which I followed for the perfect body paragraph assignment. And so I referenced previous assignments on the effect of sarcasm, because I identified that Banneker used sarcastic phrases to create a sarcastic tone in his essay. And so I discussed the effect of that and the effect that it had on his overall message, especially when it was placed at the end of the letter. And so I made sure that even though I had 2 rhetorical devices, my analysis wasn't too wordy, my examples were clear and concise, and my arguments and my rhetorical devices made sense, and there was a clear distinction between which was which, and then they tied into each other when they were transitioning from one to the next. And so as you can see, I have it clearly labeled here with the rhetorical device, the evidence, and any analysis, and I also made sure to tie it back into the audience at the end of every paragraph to show that writing sophistication credit. And so that I did that here, and I did that here as well. And my conclusion, I just restated my thesis. I gave just re-summarized everything I said in my body paragraphs, and I restated what Banneker was trying to do with his letter. And so overall, I knew that I was missing writing sophistication, and so I learned how to master writing paragraphs in a non-traditional format, and I got better at using rhetorical devices within my own essays, and I also got way better at condensing my information and making sure I can get my point across clearly and without sacrificing any of that sophisticated complex thinking. And so moving on to my argumentative essay. This essay I did a little bit better. I had a 3.5 in evidence and commentary, a 1 on intro and thesis, and a 0.5 on writing sophistication. And with the feedback I got, I learned that I needed to add more context to my examples. And so what I did was, keeping that in mind, I tried to condense my information while improving specifically the real-world example portion of each of my essays. And so my first example was George Orwell. So I gave a better explanation about where he lied during when communism was at its peak, and what he did with his specific books like 1984 and Animal Farm, and what he did to help fight against communism. And so I made sure that each argument that I made in the paragraph eventually was tied back into my thesis, and that's something that I was missing. I started talking straight away about my example rather than explaining an argument, what I was trying to prove with my example, and then leading into my example. So that's something I fixed for my first two body paragraphs. And I also incorporated things like syntax in the form of dashes or repetition to kind of explain the impact that George Orwell or other humorists and satirists did with their writing. And so for the next paragraph, I followed the exact format for the perfect body paragraph. And so I included information from the prompt, which helped really connect my argument with my example and gave a little bit more context of where I was trying to go with my example. I also used imagery in my essay to kind of explain what kind of actions political parties took as compared to satirists, and why satirists were more effective in creating enlightened thinking and persuading their audience, and why their role in society was irreplaceable. And so that just followed the perfect body paragraph format, and that was used to create a better flowing paragraph and helped me understand how sophisticated writing looks like. And so for my third body paragraph, it was a counter argument. And so I discussed that satire could be sometimes harmful or discriminatory or slanderous. And so I used the Charlie Hebdo example, and I realized that I didn't really provide that much context as to why they were specifically targeted for their actions. And so I included more information about where they were located, the context behind why there was so much tension in that area, and the effect of the terrorist attack, and analyze what that meant for satirists, humorists, and their work. And so one thing I was missing in this paragraph was tying it back into my argument. And so I wanted to explain that while they did sometimes cause slander or discrimination, they still were able to show that satire is an example of freedom of speech, and that they can have an impact on change and reform on a national level. And so I figured out there's also a disconnect between the counter-argument and the tie-in back into the argument. And so I made my counter-argument more specific, and I removed any unnecessary fluff from my paragraph so that it flows better and I can keep the reader's attention for longer. And finally, I have my conclusion, where I just restated my body paragraphs, any specific information that pertains to the thesis, restated my thesis, and just explained once again why satirists were important in society. And so overall, I added rhetorical devices, I had better transitions in my writing, and I added more context to my examples in order to reach that 100% on my essay. And so what I learned from the argumentative essay was that my writing sophistication was lacking because my style of writing was very basic. And while it included transitions and a deeper understanding, there wasn't a lot of individuality to its writing. And so I attempted to fix this by following the Getting to Advanced assignment, which was incorporating rhetorical devices into my writing. And how I tried to differentiate myself was, instead of putting 3 or 4 rhetorical devices into one paragraph, I tried to naturally split it up into the rest of the essay. And so it flowed better, and it seemed less forced or condensed in one area. And I also referenced many past assignments and essays in order to see any areas for improvement within my essay, because this was about satire and humorous, and that was basically what our unit was talking about this entire month. And so I used rhetorical devices like syntax, imagery, alliteration to add more sophistication, and tried to create a deeper understanding and help create a deeper meaning to my essay. And then going back to my rhetorical, what I was able to learn from the rhetorical essay is that, again, my writing sophistication was lacking. I received 0.5 on both my essays for writing sophistication. And I saw that I had little variance in my paragraph structures, had lots of information that I could easily condense, and that made my line of reasoning very hard to follow. And so in order to fix this problem, I used peer review and self-evaluation to condense my thoughts into simpler sentences and remove any information that was really dragging attention away from the main idea of my paragraphs. I also learned that I should vary my paragraph structure. As you can see, I split up one of my paragraphs into 2 paragraphs, and so this is a 6-paragraph essay. I also learned how to incorporate these complex rhetorical devices, and while I'm not a master at it yet, I hope to improve on it in the future. And I also analyzed multiple rhetorical devices per paragraph, which is the 3rd paragraph. And I also tried to improve my evidence and commentary, because it was only surface level before I fixed it. And so I rewrote some paragraphs so that they placed a greater emphasis on what Banneker was saying, and really did some scuba diving and try to understand the minute details that he was trying to, and the minute tone or the minute actions that he was persuading Jefferson and the government to take. And so after all my changes, I believe that I should get a 100% on both my essays, because I didn't just focus on improving the parts that I got wrong on the rubric. I worked on improving my essays as a whole, and I believe that really propelled its complexity, its analysis of the text, and its overall quality. And I hope that I can continue to improve my writing skills throughout the year, especially with the last format of writing, the synthesis essay, and I hope to be able to create good essays consistently. Thank you.